My name is Charlene Margot. I am co-founder of nonprofit The Parent Venture. We are honored and delighted to have with us tonight author Dashka Slater. Take it away, Dashka.
Thank you so much, Charlene. And I'm going to talk about 25 minutes, and then we'll have time for us to have a conversation and then for questions at the end. So I am going to try and be speedy because I tend to have lots to say about this book, which I spent 4 years reporting. And I'm just going to start by showing you the this is a little character map that it's at the front of the book. And just to give you a sense of the fact that this is a book with lots of characters in it of young people. It's from the perspective of both the followers of this racist social media account and also the young people, mostly Black girls, who were targeted by the account. And then also their friends and their teachers and their parents, and kind of the ripples out as this really devastating account was discovered. How did it happen? Well, let's start with this group of friends who were all of them were friends. The girls, the boys, they hung out together. They had sleepovers together. Some of them were planning to go to prom together. And one weekend, two of the girls in this group, whose names are Lolia and Sita, were hanging out with their friend Murphy. And they'd gone to the movies and they were hanging out at Sita's house, and Murphy showed them this racist Instagram account that another friend of theirs, Charles, had made. They had talked about having a sleepover at Charles's house the next weekend. And in the course of that conversation, Murphy showed them this private Instagram account. And on that account were pictures of Lolia with a noose drawn around her neck. Lolia and Sita asked a few questions like, what is the point of this? And Murphy kind of shrugged it off as, it's just Charles being Charles. He kind of assumed that they would see the humor in it, which is how he saw it. Their brand of humor was all about pushing the envelope, saying the things that shouldn't be said or maybe even thought. And so the girls kind of didn't know exactly how to respond. It was so shocking in the moment that it wasn't until Murphy had gone home and the two girls could talk that they were able to really express how upset they were. And by the time school started on Monday, Lolia had decided that she was going to share this information with other students on campus, particularly other Black girls. And as the news spread through school, the students were getting more and more upset, comparing notes. All they had to go on was what Lolia remembered seeing. And pretty soon the sound of the students being upset was loud enough for administrators to hear. And the girls went into the office to describe what they had seen, and the investigation commenced. So why cover this story? It's actually a fairly common story. I get Google alerts every time the words social media or online are combined with hate and schools. So I hear every time something like this happens at a school, and it happens a lot. These are issues that often don't make the paper. So much more frequently than my Google alerts are young people sharing racist things, discovering racist things that other people have shared in group chats, online, on videos that they post, all the different ways that young people are communicating with each other. And the reason that I decided to write about this topic, and particularly this story, is because I truly believe that you can't fix what you don't understand. This was an incident that really decimated the community of Albany, California. The account was discovered in 2017, and for the next 2 years, it was really dominating the life of this town. And I just spoke in Albany last night, and it is just now that the town is beginning to heal from that experience. But at the time, there were deep divisions And there was a series of events that were fallout from the discovery of this account that included a demonstration that devolved into a near riot, a failed mediation attempt between the young people on both sides, those targeted by the account and those who followed the account, lawsuits that ended up going all the way up to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court decided not to hear this lawsuit, the last of these lawsuits, in December of last year. But this was a story that absolutely dominated the life of this town in very dramatic fashion. And so my feeling as I investigated it was that it was a window into something that is happening that we need to understand, because we tell young people all the time that we want them to be upstanders, not bystanders. We want them to be good citizens. We want them to treat each other with kindness and respect. And we feel so upset when they fail us in this way. And we often just want to say, well, these are bad kids doing bad things. They should know better. If they had been raised right, they wouldn't have done these things. And would that it was so simple. But in fact, kids who are raised right also do bad things online. And kids who are raised right also hurt each other and really betray the trust of their friends and their family in getting involved with some pretty hateful stuff. So my job as a reporter is to try to understand why that happens. And that was the purpose of this book, is that I believe that if we want to really prevent this kind of hurtful behavior, we have to understand what goes into it. So for me, that means that I'm thinking like a journalist, and it's something that I really encourage everybody to do, particularly when we're in a space that hurts us, that makes us angry, that makes us frightened, that makes us sad and hurt and despairing about our young people. It is very easy to let our emotions guide us. And that is the worst thing that we can do when we are trying to be helpful to young people who are all about their emotions. Their emotions are supercharged. The amygdala, which is the back of the brain, the site of their emotions, is literally supercharged and moving much faster than the front part of the brain, the center of reason and logic and executive functioning. And so they need us to be able to take a breath, ask questions, wait for new information, try and look at things from multiple perspectives, be patient, and do all of the work that they are literally incapable of doing to the same extent, as intelligent as they are. So just to give you a quick sense of what the book is like, the chapters are very short. What you're looking at right now is an entire chapter from the day after the account was discovered. And all of this was created based on a vast amount of reporting. Firsthand reporting where I was interviewing all of the participants. I was incredibly fortunate that most of the people on both sides of this, those who followed or created the account and those who were targeted by the account, agreed to work with me, and as did many of the teachers and parents and people on those rippling out rungs of connection to this story. So firsthand reporting and interviews with the participants, I'm watching much of it unfold in public meetings and so forth. And then there was a vast amount of legal documents because of the litigation. Also things like police reports, meeting notes and minutes, internal emails at the school. Plus the kids open up their phones to me. So there's videos, emails, recordings, journals, text, direct messages, photos, all of that stuff. And then I'm also talking to experts who can put all of this into context and explain particularly about what is happening online and how this kind of hateful material ends up in the lives of young people. And so this is just to give you a sense of what the building blocks of a story like this is. Each sentence in the book is sourced to some of the reporting that I did. And then verified against other accounts so that I have a solid, verified, fact-checked, and factual book that tells this story. And I emphasize all of this because this is a story about, in part, disinformation. And so it's really important to me that people understand that the information that is in this book is actually objectively true, because we are about to enter a world in which things that are not objectively true are coming into your teenagers' lives, and particularly into their phones. So let's talk about the online lives of teenagers, because they, of course, are living a good portion of their life outside of our view. We often have no idea what they are seeing, what they are doing, who they're talking to. All of that is theirs. And I want to say that that is developmentally appropriate. They need their own space to go explore. They need to have the opportunity to try on different personalities and different ways of looking at the world, and to seek out their own interests and affinities. The problem is that they are going into such an unmediated space that they don't often have the tools to understand what they are encountering. And there are some very bad actors out there who are more than happy to help shape the thinking and the experience of young people, and are doing so very consciously. When I go to schools, I always ask kids to just raise their hand if they have encountered hate online. And I mentioned video games as one place. I mentioned social media. I mentioned the comments on videos. And I don't have to get very far into the list before every single hand in the room is up. They are seeing this material, and they are seeing it all the time. And that was the case for Charles, who was the Korean American kid who created this account. The account was created at a grilled cheese chain called The Melt. Charles and some of his friends were there after school one day, and they were joking around and trying to make each other laugh, as teenage boys often do, and showing each other stuff on their phones. And Charles showed the others a picture of his friend Anna, a Black girl who had posted a picture of herself wearing a little black dress with a coat, looking very pretty. And she had captioned it, "I want to go back to the old way." Charles made a joke to his friends along the lines of, "Does she really though?" Maybe he spelled it out to them, or maybe they got his drift right away. But what he was saying was that if Anna went back to the old way, she would be enslaved. And this got a laugh from his friends. We'll talk about why that might have been in a minute. But because he got a laugh, that laugh is like a heady experience for anybody, but particularly for an adolescent who is all about social connection. And so Charles said, somebody said, "You should make that into a meme." Charles said, "If I made it into a meme," maybe he did it right then, "would you follow it on an account?" And his friends said they would. And so the account was made right then and there, for the purpose of entertaining his friends with memes that were, in the parlance of the moment, edgy or dank. These were memes that were known for being transgressive, and that was the appeal. Now, where is that appeal coming from? Well, there are, as I mentioned, bad actors out there. These are white supremacist groups, and they know that kids are looking for laughs. This quote you see on the slide is from the neo-Nazi site, The Daily Stormer. A reporter named Ashley Feingold was able to obtain the style guide for the Daily Stormer. Most newspapers have style guides. Apparently, white supremacist sites do as well. And in the style guide, they say the tone of the site should be light. Most people are not comfortable with material that comes across as vitriolic, raging, non-ironic hatred. The unindoctrinated should not be able to tell if we are joking or not. Who is the unindoctrinated? Well, those are our kids. They cannot tell whether this is a joke or not a joke, and they are happy to be in that place. In the book, I call it the zone of both. a place where you're joking but not joking. And this is how online extremism gets a foothold, because it's introduced as a joke. And as long as it's a joke, then you don't have to worry too much about whether it's something you should or should not be saying. When I interviewed experts on online radicalization and extremism, what they told me is that these memes are auditioning in far-right forums like 4chan and 8chan and other extremist sites. And once they have been refined in those spaces, then they begin to migrate into mainstream forums, like all the places where many of us and certainly our kids are going, whether it's YouTube, gaming platforms, Discord, Instagram, TikTok, 9gag, iFunny. These are all places where far-right and extremist memes are land, and they do not carry a passport. They don't say, I came from the Daily Stormer or from a neo-Nazi group. They just show up without any context, and kids then have to decide what they are going to do. And often, as they see more of them and interact with more of them, they see more and more of them. And so that becomes sort of the default. That seems okay, because the more we are exposed to things, the more conditioned we are to find them acceptable and not shocking. There was a really good study on this topic that was done by a group called Media Matters. And it looked at TikTok, which is a place I spend a lot of time. TikTok has a very sensitive and responsive algorithm. And so what the researchers did was they started with a blank For You page, which is what you start with. And it's the usual blend when you start of animal videos and dancing and a lot of benign stuff. And then the researchers only interacted with transphobic and homophobic content. And within a couple of days, their entire feed became far-right conspiracy theories, anti-Semitic, transphobic, homophobic, white nationalist, misogynist, all the isms, and many of them actually including calls to violence. It happened so quickly, and you can see exactly how it could happen for a kid who is not doing it on purpose, but is interacting either because they think something is funny or because they're curious or because maybe they actually have those views. But however you get there, those views are going to be reinforced, and then you are going to be moved down the line into increasingly extreme forces. Now, big tech is well aware of all of this. Of course, they have content moderators, and they also have people whose job it is to try and figure out how to keep people on their site. And they are particularly interested in young people, because young people are a huge source of money for them. And what young people offer is their attention and their buying power. And so these are quotes from the New York Times from 2021, when some of this information was first revealed about Meta and their deep commitment to retaining teenage users. Meta was aware that young users' developing brains are particularly vulnerable to certain forms of manipulation, and it chose to exploit those vulnerabilities through targeted features such as dopamine manipulating recommendation algorithms. And I'm going to talk to you now a little bit more about what that means, because that's a lot of words all strung together. This quote is from the federal lawsuit against Meta that was filed by 33 state attorneys generals, plus the District of Columbia. And the entire lawsuit is a fascinating read, but it really zeroes in on this question of dopamine manipulation, because all of us, when we encounter something online that gives us pleasure, like being liked, for example, or being followed, or getting engagement with something we've done, we get a little hit of dopamine. And our brains are particularly responsive to intermittent rewards, which is what you get in a slot machine. That is, you don't know that you're going to get it, but sometimes you get it. And that gives you a much higher jolt, a much more powerful dopamine response. What is being alleged in this federal lawsuit is that the dopamine hit that comes from occasionally encountering disturbing content is actually not a bug, but a feature. That they know that occasionally encountering something that gives a high emotional response in an adolescent brain with a supercharged amygdala is going to create engagement. And that includes bullying, it includes body shaming, it includes violence, all the negative stuff that we say to ourselves we are trying to prevent our children from experiencing. These are built in as slot machine, your 3 gold bars in a row, to provoke that sense of something interesting just happened online. And so it is not a bug, it's a feature. And it not only keeps kids scrolling, but it also encourages them to participate in some of the worst stuff online. That includes disinformation. So almost half of American adults agree with at least 4 conspiracy statements, which that alone can send you into a deep depression, at least me. But teens, that is a 10-point jump. Teens aged 13 to 17 agree with 4 or more conspiracy statements 60% of the time. And that the more they are spending time on social media, the more that goes up. So it reaches 69% of young people who spend 4 or more hours a day on a single social media platform are agreeing with 4 conspiracy statements. I put one of them up on the slide, which is known as the Great Replacements theory. This is an idea that mass migration of people into the Western world is a deliberate policy and part of a scheme to replace white people. This had 52% agreement among teens who are heavy social media users. None of this is accidental. On the receiving end, 3 and 4 American youth age 15 to 25 have run into extremist content online. Most of them are not looking for it. This is just something that they encounter as they are going through their regular social media lives. About a quarter of our kids have been targeted by online hate. And then this inevitably begins to migrate into real life. So we get about 1.3 million students who have been bullied for some aspect of their identity. These are 2018-19 statistics from the GAO, the Government Accountability Office. That's the most recent statistics that we have. I am not sure that it has stayed that low at this point. And so what we see is that kids are constantly getting these jokes because these jokes have been mainstreamed online, and then they become part of the cultures of schools. So the average Black teenager is encountering 5 instances of discrimination per day. Those are in all different kinds of venues, but many of them come from jokes. When you look at school culture surveys, you see that one thing that kids of color and other kids from marginalized backgrounds talk about a lot is that their peers are joking with them in ways that are not only offensive, but also hurtful. And that takes a toll. Dr. Arlene Geronimus has done this incredibly groundbreaking research on weathering, which looks at the impacts of bullying, of discrimination on the physical body. And weathering is the term that she coined for the premature aging that happens from having your body in a constant stress response, a constant fight or flight mode that happens when you are receiving messages of discrimination all the livelong day. I recently came across a little survey that a Substacker named Claire Zolke had done. She just asked in a few different forums for people who are now in their early 20s to look back at when they first got online, first got phones and social media. What would you tell yourself if you could? And I was struck by this response. First, don't post stupid things to be funny. At a young age, all you want to do is make your friends laugh. But as you get older, you're going to look back and wince at some of the things you said. This was certainly the case with Accountable. These were kids who wanted to be funny, and it not only did it make them wince, it was extremely hurtful to the people who were the targets of those attempts at humor, and very much derailed the lives of both the creator and the followers of that account. I want to make sure we have time for questions, but I'd like to just give you one more thing from this survey and then some questions to ask your own kids. This survey, another of the young people who responded asked, if you could go back in time and talk to your younger self. And they said, instead of telling my past self anything, I'd like to tell politicians or whoever can actually make the change to add courses for middle schools focused on the dangers and benefits of having access to social media platforms. I think awareness and the ability to discuss the concerns with your peers would help prevent a lot of the potential trauma that can occur from having access to social media when you're young. So this is what young people are saying. I hear these kinds of remarks constantly as I travel to schools. Young people know that they are in a dangerous territory. They just don't know how to navigate it, and they're looking to the adults in their lives to help them. So here are a few questions to ask your kid today, tomorrow. This is a chance to open up a conversation. It's not a chance to give them the third degree or to, put them under a bare light bulb and submit them to scrutiny, but really to start the conversation, because they have a lot to say on this topic. But they know that we know less about social media than they do. And so it's a hard divide to bridge. So I really recommend coming at this with an atmosphere of curiosity, with a feeling of humility, interest, no judgment, no accusations. Please don't go and say, are you doing something racist online? It's not going to probably open up the conversation. But you can ask, what are you seeing and hearing? Have you seen online hate? Have you seen white supremacist content? Like, what are you seeing? And then how does it make you feel when you see that stuff? Often kids will say, well, I don't like it, but what can I do? I can't do anything. So that's the time to talk through with them. What are their options? How do you change the algorithm so that you're seeing less of it? Where can you report it? What to do if it involves people that you know? And then particularly to get them to think about the experience of other people. Because when a kid from a privileged background and whatever different forms of privilege each of us carries says, it's no big deal, I really don't engage with it, I really don't think about it, that is a failure to think about the impact on somebody who doesn't enjoy those same privileges. So this is an opportunity to get them thinking more empathically about how that feels to somebody else. And then if they'll show you, it's an opportunity to have more conversations. And then to really get them to think about, why are certain groups being portrayed in a certain way? What kinds of impacts do you think that has for other people? Who is benefiting from having this stuff online? Who is harmed? And then how do you know whether something is true or not? And all of this is a way both for you to understand where your kid is at, but also to get them thinking about, how do they know? How do they evaluate what they're seeing? I have lots more to talk about with all of this, but I do want to make sure that we have time for questions. So thank you very much for listening to my rants about social media. And I am interested in hearing what you all have to say.
Well, thank you, Dashka. That was amazing. The book made me think. You're making us think. This is such an important topic. We have on with us tonight some board members from the Sequoia Union High School District, and they're very interested in your slides and your data. So thank you. Thank you for doing this. It's really important. I want to start by asking you, what got you interested in writing nonfiction for young adults? We know you also as a children's literature author, but in particular, this I understand is billed as a YA book, young adult, although certainly it's for adults to read as well. we don't have to keep the slides up if you don't want to.
No, let's end. Oops, let's stop the share. Sorry, I got so interested in your question.
Whoops, we lost you, Dashka. Where are you?
Uh-oh. Am I still missing?
You're still missing.
Interesting. Let's see what happens.
Yeah. We're going to get you back, Dashka. We can keep talking.
Okay, it claims, so something happened. I'm just gonna switch cameras if I can. But this will just take me hopefully just a minute as I figure out how to do that. Switch camera. See if that'll do it.
I'm sorry, I shouldn't have asked you to take the slides down.
Oh, this is such a fun part of life these days is.
That's right. Where are the 17-year-olds when we need them?
Exactly. Let's see if that will do it.
Huh.
Hmm.
Well,
You know what she looks like? She responds.
okay. Well, I'll tell you what, let's just keep talking and we'll
We're gonna
see.
keep talking. I can talk and fool around with my camera, hopefully at the same time, and see what happens.
Oh.
Um,
Let's go back to that, the young adult.
the young adult. Okay.
Young adult.
And I'm also, maybe what I'm gonna also try is just to go back to sharing my screen and see if that helps us.
Yeah, we can do that too.
Okay, so I never think of there being a huge difference between writing for young adults and writing for anybody. I am basically just a person who likes to tell stories, and I tell those stories. Did that help at all? To get me on there? Nope, I'm still not.
Still not. Oh, we saw your picture for a minute.
Well, that's nice for the
It's closer.
closer. I don't know what is happening. Okay. Sorry. I don't want to spend too much time.
That's okay. We'll just keep talking.
So I basically just want to tell stories, but I particularly want to talk to young people about the things that are important to them. And so, young people are engaging with so many difficult topics. They are trying to figure out how to be people in the world. They're trying to figure out how to make choices as citizens. They're trying to figure out how to have a diverse society and what their role in a diverse society is. And so because of that, I want to give them the tools to have those discussions. And when I write books about complicated topics, I hope that what I'm doing is opening up the place for a discussion and for somebody to. I did. Okay, I just unplugged my camera. So.
Okay, good to see you again.
So now I have to just put things so that I can see you. But so that's why I write for young adults, is because I trust them and I love them and I believe in them, and I want to give them the tools to be able to have important and powerful discussions.
Well, I think that's really interesting because, that is the same goal that we have. Is this program that I started 18 years ago was to give parents the tools and strategies and education they needed to talk with their kids. This is not a how-to. This is really education to give you things to talk with your students about. Just like you said tonight, that screen, so perfect. What are the questions you should ask your kid? We as parents, we're not going to catch up to them. It used to be when we started educating about this 10 years ago, 15 years ago, I was actually working at IBM in educational software development before Microsoft Word existed. So I've been doing this a long time.
Oh yeah, a long time.
A long time. But the kids are always going to stay ahead of us. So we can't just find the next platform, right? The best thing to do, like you said, is ask questions, engage, be curious. I'll tell you one thing is I really did find myself feeling sorry for all the kids in this. What did you find out that was most surprising in the process of your research?
Well, the first one was when I discovered how they really thought they were just joking, you
Yeah.
know, and uh, I had a hard time accepting that at the beginning. We had a lot of conversations back and forth. Charles is the person who created the account and is really a very sweet and was very open with me. And he kept on saying, you have to understand teen humor. And I was like, okay, you've lost me. Like, you have to show me what you're looking at because this makes no sense to me.
Yeah.
And as we talked, I could see all the ways in which he really didn't understand the repercussions. And in fact, after the book came out, he emailed me to say like that he felt like he had learned new things, both because he didn't understand, because the community was so divided and the kids were no longer speaking to one another, they hadn't really understood each other's experience.
Yeah.
And so I think it helped him to understand why what he had done was so hurtful. But also the book explains the origins of some of the racist tropes and racist iconography, like nooses and gorillas. And that kind of history, I don't think had penetrated. He knew they were powerful symbols, but he didn't understand really why they were so powerful. And this, I think, is an important aspect of things because we often tell kids, don't use the N-word. Don't, you can't say that. And that's what they tell each other. You can't say that. But they often don't explain, and adults don't explain why. What are the reasons behind these rules? That it's not that there's like a taboo against these syllables that comes out of nowhere, but that these are words that have intense stories behind them. And those stories are why you don't say those words. And so it's important that kids know those stories.
And I believe, as you say in this book, you can't underestimate the power of humor, especially for an adult male, as social currency, right?
So much happens, particularly for boys through humor. They, even in our supposedly feminist, society, boys, particularly in middle and high school, are in an intense straitjacket where they are really not, they don't feel free to express emotions other than anger and humor. Those are the two things that are socially acceptable for boys. And everything else makes you look weak. Being sad, being afraid, love, all of those things are things that they tease each other about and accuse each other of, insert homophobic slur here, of being if they express them. If you are in love, then you're a simp, right? So humor is one place that they can put all kinds of emotional expression. And so that means that it's worth a lot to them. They're willing to risk a lot to have the connection that they have with each other through humor. And so when we are like, really, was a stupid joke worth it? Well, in retrospect, probably not. But in the moment when all they want is that connection with their friends and to feel loved and validated through laughter, then yes, they felt it was worth it.
Yeah. So, Dashka, this to me, as somebody who's been immersed in schools my whole career, it is a cautionary tale. But do you think that this happened in Albany in the East Bay, right? But do you think that this story could happen at any school anywhere in the United States?
Oh, absolutely. And in fact, it does. I spend my time traveling around talking to schools, and I usually, just before I go on, I always ask if there is something that the students are going to have in their minds that I don't know about. Has some kind of incident happened at this school that the kids are all thinking about? And about half the time, the answer is yes. And then the other half, the librarian or the teacher or the administrator, whoever is sponsoring me, says, oh no, we haven't had anything like what happened in your book. And I say, really, you haven't had any social media incidents? And then they'll say, oh, well, there's somebody in my office right now who did post something, we're waiting to figure out what to do. Like, it's so daily that they're not even thinking that this is the experience that they're going through right now. So this is an everyday problem at schools.
I mean, your data there that a Black child may have 5 incidents per day of a microaggression, that's pretty stunning.
It's pretty stunning. Yeah.
It's stunning. And, we need to know this, right? We need to know this. So, Dashka, we're going to turn to the audience questions here in 1 minute, but there's one I wanted to ask you as a fellow writer. Did you discover something about yourself in the process of writing this book?
Well, of course. Of course. And so one of the things, because I write about difficult hot button topics, where there are sort of always, posited as two sides, although I would say that I dispute this arrangement because I don't think in the end there are sides to stories like this. There's no debate about whether the account was racist or, whether it's okay to make those jokes. But there are multiple perspectives. And I am always working to keep my own emotions in check because these are really, emotionally triggering topics. And I would feel like everybody else does. I get upset when I see a child suffering. And so, but what I learned through writing this book was that it is possible to kind of transcend those emotional responses without being made of stone, that you can feel them, but you cannot be driven by them. And so as I worked to tell this story and to understand why everybody made the decisions that they made, because a lot of bad decisions were made, both by children and adults, that being able to access that part of me that could understand and be interested and curious about people's decisions and who they were and why they did the things they did, rather than just feeling upset at them. It's a discipline and it's a muscle, but it is one that I have found very useful in my life.
That's a good answer, Dashka. It's a tough question. Of course, 4 years is a long time to work on something like this, and teenagers are so volatile. I know you love them or you wouldn't be doing this kind of work.
I do love them.
I know, I could tell. So here's a good question. You said you were in Albany just last night where this took place. One of our attendees is asking, curious to know what's been done lately in Albany to help with the healing.
Yeah, so this has been really exciting for me because it was a very wounded community. And I did a lot of interviews in the time that I was reporting this story where I couldn't believe how close to the surface the emotions were, even years later, where people would have really, trauma responses where they would cry or they would shake. They would write to me the next day and say I couldn't sleep, after our conversation. Like, it was a really, and these weren't necessarily even people who were that close to it, but people who had been working around it or who had a child in the school, but a child who was unaffected. It really did have these kind of devastating, created these devastating responses in people. And so I was pleased to find that the community has used my book as a way to get past those immediate emotional responses and to share information, because the community was so fragmented that they didn't know one another's stories. And they have been having a community-wide read. They've been bringing in speakers to discuss things. The high school has been working, I think, straight through since all of this went down, to diversify their curriculum, to have, better kind of social emotional awareness. They're, very academic district that has been very achievement focused, and I think trying to strengthen some of the other aspects of the education they provide so that kids have more tools for dealing with something like this when it happens.
So here's a question from a board trustee. Really good question. What would you say or advise for policy at schools?
Okay, so I'm going to try and do this quickly, because I know we don't have tons of time, but it's a long answer. First of all, I truly believe in restorative practices, and restorative practices went terribly when they were tried in Albany, and there is a reason for that. That
Okay.
you cannot start using restorative justice or non-punitive forms of discipline right at the moment when you have a racial incident or another identity-based incident. If you have been suspending and expelling your kids of color for all the transgressions, for getting into fights or mouthing off to their teacher or all the other things that kids do, and then suddenly, instead of using exclusionary discipline, in this one instance, you want to use restorative practices, kids are going to call BS. That is not going to feel fair to them.
Mm.
So bringing in restorative practices has to be a school-wide endeavor, and it has to be for everything, not just for particular things. And it is a process of training everybody in your school community, students, staff, parents, everybody, to think in terms of healing and education rather than punishment. And the data on this is incredibly clear. We know that a single suspension reduces a probability of graduating even for top students. We know that the relationship between a student and school is broken when there is exclusionary discipline. We know that the healing of victims is not improved by the punishment of the person who harmed them. Survivors of harm need many things, but they are often promised that they will feel better if the person who hurt them is kicked out of school, for example. Now, they may need to feel safe, and they may need to not be in the same class with the person who harmed them. Like, let's be clear, but it is not about whether the person who harmed them was punished enough. And that is a false promise that when we tell them that that's going to be true, we end up hurting them, because then they don't feel better, because what they actually need is other things. They need counseling, they need validation, they need to have their questions answered, they need a transparent process that they can understand. They may need their identity uplifted, they lots of things, but we do them a disservice when we tell them everything will be better if so-and-so gets kicked out of school.
That was the really heartbreaking part of reading your book, is how the kids were all harmed. The harmers were harmed, the victims were harmed, and it just went on and on and on. And I love that you brought up shame versus guilt and how it's so relevant to this situation.
It's really an important distinction, and one that I think about a lot. Shame had so much to do with this story, because kind of everybody was shamed.
Yeah.
The girls who were targeted were shamed for being Black. And then the shaming sort of turned around, and the kids who had followed the account were shamed for being racist. And then you ended up with a bunch of kids who felt ashamed of who they were, and felt that they were not loved and not cherished and not worthwhile. And you really risk with young people self-harm. And
one of the boys became suicidal, literally.
Yeah. And so, it's important for us as adults to talk to kids about the behavior rather than the person, that the behavior is racist. The person can be anything, the person has infinite capacity for growth. And that is so particularly true for young people.
So true, Dashka. So here's a good question. And you can answer this as best you can. We're not expecting you to be a technology expert, although you're pretty expert by this point. All right. How do you change the algorithm social media uses to show less hate or offensive material?
Yeah, well, you're right. I'm not a tech person. And the problem is that the social media companies are, they're serving multiple masters, and their profits are based on attention. You sell advertising based on how many people are engaged with your platform. That is the most important metric. And So, and that is why tech companies hired people who are experts on understanding the human brain and how to engage human attention. And unfortunately, there is a direct link between those practices and all the bad stuff we talked about. So I'm not sure how you do that. I think that it requires tech companies to be content with less profit. And I'm not sure that they will do that on their own. And so we are working within the confines of the First Amendment, and it becomes extremely difficult in the current legal landscape to change the incentives for tech companies. But I do think that that is what we will have to do.
Yes, much easier said than done. I mean, what you just showed us there with how things from the far right move into the mainstream, that, I don't know, that's really powerful, Dashka. I read and read and read, and I hadn't seen that exact thing before. So thank you for bringing that to our attention.
Yeah, and I do want to say that, you know, this content moderation is extremely difficult nut to crack. You tend to get vast amounts of secondary trauma in your content moderators, plus the, you know, people, it's a cat and mouse game. But I'm interested to see if AI can be used, if technology can be used to help us with some of these issues. I just haven't seen good information on this one way or the other, but it seems to me that AI may be able to help us in this instance.
Absolutely. So Dashka, one of the things that I was really struck by in reading your descriptions of these students, boys, girls, harmers, victims, made me really think about Dr. Bruce Perry's book, What Happened to You? And we actually had Dr. Perry with us a few months ago, because it seemed to me that many of the kids you talk about had suffered tremendous loss, grief, parents who died. It was, every story was complex, wasn't it?
It really was. And this is something that I think about a lot when I am writing about young people, is that, you know, the stories that they're telling themselves, and, you know, we all do this to a certain extent, is you walk around and you think everybody else is doing fine. Everybody looks fine. Everybody's putting a good face on things. But when you're young, you really believe that that is true, that you are the outlier.
Yeah.
And so they don't know what other people are walking around with. And it was particularly tragic to me that this was the case, because I have to believe that if they knew a little bit more, that they might have treated one another with more care.
That's so true. I mean, I love how you end with asking them to go back and what would they say to their 15-year-old selves? Some of them would have just let it play out again, it sounded like.
Yeah, this was a young person named Aaron who, in the end, he felt like what he had gained from the whole experience, the person that he is now versus the person he was as a sophomore in high school, was a better person. And so he wasn't sure that he would, you know, if he could go back in time, just unfollow the account and not go through any of it. He wasn't sure that he, you know, like it was a big thing to say that he would do it all again. I'm not sure what he would really do if faced with the choice, but I thought it was interesting because he grew and changed a lot, and he developed a lot of self-awareness that he didn't have.
Yeah.
So, and
Yeah.
that's, you know, we want kids to gain all the knowledge and the wisdom without having to put them, you know, into a severe depression and risk of self-harm. And this is why I stress restorative practices so much, because I think we can help young people get the benefits, and we don't have to make them suffer needlessly. You know, of course, the process of really understanding that you've hurt somebody else, that there is suffering involved. And having people be mad at you because of a harmful thing you did, that is also, there's suffering involved. But we don't need to pile it on and tell them that they are worthless and that they will never have friends again and they will never be able to get a job and they will never be able to go to college. Like, that is unnecessary.
And a lot of the kids got very derailed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Very,
almost all of them did.
yeah, on both sides, right? Girls and boys.
Yeah.
All right, so Dashka, we're coming to the end of our hour together, but I just quickly wanted to touch on this last question because it's a good one. I'm not certain that banning phones is the answer, but she's asking, are schools banning cell phones? Are they getting positive results or is there not enough data yet? Are parents the main obstacle? I mean, my feeling is we have to teach them to use this tool. Where do you land on this discussion?
What I would say is that I'd like to see parents wait as long as possible. There's this movement, wait until 8th, and I think that would do a lot. If that was, the difficult thing is that this is, everybody's kind of has to jump in the pool at the same time. It's hard to have your middle schooler be the only one who doesn't have a smartphone.
Right.
But if it were possible to do that, I think we would avoid a lot of trouble because middle schoolers, they really are all gas and no brakes. They do really a lot of dumb stuff, and a cell phone enables so much of it. So I would say delaying is important. And then certainly schools where kids have to check their phones in at the beginning of the day report better school cultures. They report more engagement in the classroom. They're very distracting. We all have this, we're just the same as they are. We're looking at checking our phones during meetings, and it's not just a teen problem. So I think it would be nice to see some ways to hold those back.
Thank you. Good answer. Okay, last question. Dashka, this is an amazing book. I want you all to read it. And I want you to read the 57 Bus too, because that topic is one that I love. But after everything you've seen and heard with all these kids, what gives you hope?
Oh, the kids themselves give me hope. It was so hard to see them suffering, but I also saw their incredible resilience. And I also just saw how smart they are, how funny, how interested in the world, how curious they are. Our young people really are a source of inspiration to me every time I go to a school and I get to talk to them, and I see how justice-minded they are.
Yeah.
I really walk out with a great deal of optimism because they truly want to make a better world, and it's up to us to help them have the tools to do so.
Beautiful words to end this lovely session, Dashka. So thank you again for your amazing book, everybody. I really recommend it. Go get one. Give it to your kids or put it on the coffee table. They will pick it up, right? As you say, they want to learn too. They're just as concerned as we are, right? So again, big thanks to you, Dashka Slater. Congratulations on your big award, the LA Award for Accountable. So look at all those hearts and accolades. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, everyone, for being with us tonight. This video will be available soon on our video library, and we hope to see you at the next event. Take care, everybody. Thank you, Dashka. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks so much.
Good night.
Good night.